Hey, welcome to Through the Stained Glass, conversations on media and culture through a Christian lens. Today, our guests are Kevin Bennett, who is one of our producers. You're actually our producer at City on a Hill.
Yeah.
I say one of, like there's more. You're the producer at City on a Hill.
I'm just that good. It feels like there's 5 of me.
Yeah, and then we have Landon Brewer, who is our graphic designer. Today's film is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is the sequel to the mega hit from 2014 by Marvel Studios. So,
hope you're ready. It'll be here any minute. Is that a rifle?
You don't know what a rifle looks like?
It's just swords were your thing and guns were mine. But I guess we're both doing guns now. I just didn't know that.
Well, that's intense.
So yeah, I'd like to, pretty quickly, I guess, get to some of the worldview elements of the film that we kind of discerned but one thing I just wanted to kind of get out of the way was, this was a really funny, enjoyable movie. And so it can be kind of a challenge to, I guess, bring some kind of Christian wisdom or Christian point of view to the whole thing. But yeah, really funny, well done movie.
No, I totally agree. I mean, Guardian of the Galaxy is really weird. But yeah, with having Chris Pratt and some of the other actors and actresses in it, it's hilarious.
You will not lose your faith if you go to this movie. Enjoy it. It'll be fun. It's a fun spectacle movie, big epic Marvel movie. It's just fun. It's just a fun movie, totally.
Yeah, and so when you're driving, sometimes, when you're like, okay, we're going to be talking about this from a worldview perspective, I think, like, 2 dangers that I wanted to avoid. As I was thinking of it, like, driving home, I'm like, I want to avoid these kind of 2 pitfalls you can fall into when you're talking about a movie about like this, is that you're like, okay, let's moralize about all the unsavory content elements, or let's like just wring this rag for one drop of like gospel symbolism. Yep. But, and it has like those standard things of, a character is willing to sacrifice himself to save those he loves, or an entire world, or all that stuff. Right. That's in a lot of movies, and it's actually in a lot of blockbuster movies, which is interesting, but has been like talked about extensively. But one thing you brought up while we were talking about is that there is kind of, I think this merits some disclaimers, but there is kind of like a God figure in the story.
Yeah, one of the things that Richie and I were talking about earlier is that, so you have this God figure that essentially has always ends up creating everything, and the reason for his creation of everything is because he's lonely and he wants purpose. So I don't really know where that leads our discussion, but I do think it's interesting, obviously disclaimer, this God is not the same God of the Bible, but I do think it's interesting to think of like, okay, did God need us when he created us? Was God lonely? Because I do think that worldview and that mindset speaks pretty heavily into like the way we see God and the way that we as Christians see the world. Now, I don't think any Christian is going there, seeing the movie once again and saying, oh, that's the God of the Bible. But I do think like there's some interesting conversations to be had on those 2 points. So
yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, I think even a lot of pulpits, there's like discussions about like there's this way we can often talk about God, that like he was rather needy, and he needed meaning, and he needed purpose, and he needed someone to love, which by definition is bad theology, because like by definition God doesn't need anything. He's self-sustaining. Right. So
yeah, and I think like and the reason he's self-sustaining, the reason he doesn't need us, and the reason he wasn't lonely is like we see in the Trinity. You have this communal relationship that's been going on for eternity and will continue to go on for eternity. And so like, yeah, there was never this moment where God was lonely, because the Father had the Son and the Son had the Spirit, and there was this community of Godship, that was kind of continuously going. And then there was an interesting thing in the movie too, of where this God figure in Guardians of the Galaxy was very like power hungry, power driven, and then you had this human being that was not power hungry and power driven, but it was like righteousness driven, which is also totally counterculture to how we believe God is that he is both of these things. So.
Any profound insights?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a really interesting dynamic, because it's like you have these movies, that are, okay, these are not faith-based films. These are very just mainstream movies, but they address topics, you know, of deity and supernaturalism. And I think it's a danger because in one sense, people will try to read too much into it and try to ascribe, you know, certain things to it. Like, oh yeah, God's like this guy because of this. And it's like, no, he's actually nothing like it. But it's funny because, like, humans can't get around, like, that need to kind of somehow explain certain supernatural things, or to even just, I mean, of their own invention, to try to, you know, to the screenwriter's best ability, you know, they're trying to create out of nothing, like, okay, how do we make this deity God, how do we explain him? You know, and there's a couple throwaway lines of like, oh, I came out of nothing, I just sort of woke up and started using my mind, and you know what I mean? And it's like, it's funny because like they get kind of like close in a lot of ways, but it's like you can't, they skew it completely. You know, like they inject our human fallenness into this deity character. Like they can't even create a perfect God if they wanted to, you know what I mean? It's like, he always gets twisted, and you know, they always make the deity out to be all of the ones, you know, in the first movie, and in this one, and Thanos, you know, in kind of the grander Marvel universe. It's like, they're all these supernatural, powerful beings, but it's like they're all evil and they're all wicked. And humans always end up kind of being the good guys, and the ones who, you know, by their human nature are the ones who are the saviors of the whole story and plot.
Well, I thought one thing that's interesting too about his kind of ambitions about being power hungry is he wanted to make everything uniform and an extension of himself. So like he actually shows this model of his plan where it's like you see Earth and you see planets like Saturn, like all these diverse looking planets become just these big blue orbs. They all look the same, everything's uniform. All the, you know, when those little orbs start exploding on all the planets, they're absorbing everything, and just, you know, everything's becoming uniform. And it's this idea of like, you know, again, you know, I don't know if we can make the disclaimer enough times that like nowhere is the film claiming this is God, this is people's conception of God, and this is what God is really like. It's not that at all. But it is interesting that some of that does manifest of, yeah, it's like, you know, this idea that like if there's a big supernatural force out there, it's kind of power hungry, it's needy, it's on a big ego trip, and it wants to like it wants to consume all individuality and like just make everything lose its personality, lose its distinctiveness, and just be one big uniform mess, basically. So again, this stuff can be overread, but I don't feel like we've done that. I do feel like it was like just kind of interesting. It was kind of a standout feature. And I think by contrast, when Christianity does talk about the real God, it makes very opposite claims. Like I said, you know, it was not neediness, it was love, it was, you know, this was a self-sustaining God already in relationship through the Trinity. And then also its goal isn't to make everything uniform. Like I love what C.S. Lewis says, you know, that, yeah, like Christ does conform you to his likeness once you believe in him, but at the same time, seemingly paradoxically, he makes you more yourself than ever.
Groot, put your seatbelt on!
Another thing I thought that the movie sparked for me was just, you know, there's this sort of thing that's been written about, I think, quite a bit about how, the extent to which sci-fi influences or inspires technology, but also the way sci-fi is inspired by discussions or prototypes around emerging technology. And so, you know, what kind of technology, you know, like people are obsessed with like, we got to make a hoverboard. When are we going to get a hoverboard? It was in Back to the Future.
Right.
I want a hoverboard. And then
lace
people
up
make
shoes that automatically lace themselves.
Right.
Still waiting for those.
Right. And so, but then sometimes because things are, you know, being talked about, you know, we see them, because things are talked about as imminent realities technologically, we see them integrated into sci-fi movies. And, you know, I don't want to have like a lengthy, uncomfortable conversation about this, but one thing I did notice based on things I've seen in the news and something I saw in the film is we were reintroduced to one character. He's in like a brothel of robots. And it did make me think about how there are some emerging technologies on the horizon, like with artificial intelligence and robots and virtual reality, where like Christians are going to have like reasoned, rational responses to these things. I maybe just opened a can of worms, but I'm throwing that can of worms at y'all.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you first brought this up, I was like, artificial intelligence, that might be, kind of down the road. But it's interesting, like, I think it was a week or two ago on the Jimmy Fallon show, The Tonight Show, they were doing like a robotics kind of demonstration, and there was this essentially artificial intelligent humanoid kind of person that like Jimmy Fallon was interacting with, and you could tell like how uncomfortable he was. Like,
this is Sophia. She can process conversational data, emotional data, and use all of this to form relationships with people.
Okay, so... Hi, Sophia.
Hello, Jimmy.
Oh, my God.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. I won. This is a good beginning of my plan to dominate the human race.
One of the things that we constantly see in technology, whether big or small, is like once you cross a threshold, you never go back. And that's not to say like don't use technology. It's like I have an iPhone in my office. Like technology can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be a really dangerous thing. And I think Christians and non-Christians that are in a creative space where they're making things have to inevitably ask the question of like, not only can I make this, but should I be making this? And what are the repercussions of that?
Yeah, well, and I've seen a lot of times too where people who aren't even Christians know that there are Christians out there. And so whenever there's a policy being discussed, to kind of to push back the cultural influence of Christians, they will say, well, the Bible doesn't say we can't do this. And like, so and the only reason I say that is there is this kind of default bad theology in our culture that anything the Bible doesn't explicitly address is like free and open reign. Whereas the reality is, you've got to bring like biblical principles to bear. It's like there's a framework where you got to bring these principles to bear on things. So, and technology is a good example of that because, like, yeah, the Bible, which was written 2,000 years ago, isn't going to give you specific prescriptions about how to use technology, but there's going to be principles you have to apply. And so I don't know what all the answers are. I haven't thought through it all myself, but.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to take someone really going through the old Greek and the old Hebrew and finding what's the, term for sex robot, because essentially that's what they're going to be looking for, to find a way to either justify
really
it. Really
astonishing. Honestly, unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, to that point of technology and its use. I mean, I think it's like anything, like all sin, where it's something good and is usually twisted and perverted and taken to the extreme in a bad way. So, I mean, like that's a reality. That part of the movie, like for all of its absurdity, it's like it is a reality. There's news articles all over the place where it's like these sex robots, that's what they are, like they're being made for people, and it's unfortunate, and I feel like we need to see it more as an opportunity of like addressing people's needs. Like what are their actual needs? Why do people feel like that's the solution or the answer to whatever, internal hole they're having?
Yeah, obviously there's going to be some deep underlying need that's driving that kind of thing. And so, something that also made my antenna perk up like during the movie is like, again, when the sort of God-like figure talks about, he was driven to do these things by a quest for meaning. That kind of talk always just kind of makes me kind of sit up. And it's just fascinating. You see that over and over again. A lot of times in movies it isn't explicitly stated, but just that drive for, my life has to have purpose, it has to have meaning.
Sometimes the thing you're searching for your whole life, it's right there by your side all along.
You're right.
And then I think a final thing I wanted to kind of address is, I was mentioning before, I listened to a podcast a few months ago. It was a podcast dedicated to sci-fi as a genre, whether it's in movies or literature. And the host of the podcast, which I can't remember the name of it, and I can't remember the name of the host, but he was an atheist, and he was talking about how, in his experience from going to conventions or conversing with sci-fi creators, that it seems to be kind of the domain of atheists. And he said, that makes sense to me, and that's as it should be. You know, science, in his mind, kind of equals atheism. It kind of equals a naturalistic worldview. Therefore, theists need not apply. People who with any kind of allowance for the supernatural in their view need to just stay out of it. I don't know. I'd kind of like to directly challenge that notion with, you know, what could Christians possibly bring to the table if they were more engaged in the creation of sci-fi work, whether it is movies or books or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any space, whether it be that in particular or anything, anything where Christians are very much the minority, there should not be a tendency to like shy away from those fields. And I think in the past that's been the case of, you know, well, I'm a Christian, so I don't fit in this field, so I'm not going to do that. And it's like, I think that's the opposite of what we need as a culture. And I think what we're needing more than anything is like Christians that, you know, if you're going to write sci-fi, if you're going to be in these like movies or whatever it is, like, yes, you're a Christian and you're really good at what you do. You know what I mean? And then like being able to say both of those things, because I think with Christian, you know, let's just stay on the subject of art because that's kind of what we're in. Particularly, Christians a lot of times get either this free pass because, you know, we're making really bad stuff, but hey, we're a Christian, so it's okay. You know, of just having this need of having Christians that are in secular world and they're really good at their jobs. Now, as far as like what they bring, I mean, other than excellence, I don't really, I don't really know what they bring in particular outside of that and their Christian worldview. But yeah.
Yeah, man. I think it's, you know, I think each of us is uniquely wired, and people who enjoy science fiction, like, I think that's something that, you know, we can celebrate and encourage. Like, I don't think that's something we need to shy away from.
Yeah.
You know, some people who may not be interested in science fiction, that's fine too. Like, you know, whatever your passions are, whatever you're driven towards, like, you know, be engaged in that sector. So I would say, you know, for parents or, you know, anyone who is uniquely kind of attracted to science fiction, like, explore that, dive into that, you know, like, enjoy it for what it is, you know, take the good out of it, challenge the bad.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's, I hope that, you know, kids who enjoy comics, kids who enjoy these Marvel movies, like, I really hope their parents aren't discouraging them or demeaning them or making them feel like it's a silly pursuit, you know, like J.R.R. Tolkien, right? Like, I think I can't quote him directly, but, you know, I know he kind of has an article or an essay, something about kind of the power of fairy tales. Yeah. You know, and clearly with The Hobbit, you know, that's a very powerful piece set in this science fiction fairy tale world that people still today are using for, you know, analogies, you know, just further discernment, you know, sermon examples even, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like science fiction can be a powerful tool for Christians to explore deeper things. Right. And we should encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not shy away from
that. Yeah, and I think of going back even way back to, and not this has to be the model for everything, but like you go back to like even like Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, right? Yeah. Even she's bringing to the table this idea of the question of, you know, could we versus should we? I think that's an interesting thing to always bring to the table. And then the other thing is, I think there's something interesting that, and Marvel's dealt with this before, like with Thor and other things, is what is that boundary between technology and the supernatural? Like Richard Wurmbrand, who founded Voice of the Martyrs, in one of his books, you know, when he was in prison as a Christian ministering to other people, and they were, you know, bucking the idea of the supernatural and miracles, he said, well, what is a miracle but something that someone with like superior knowledge can do? Like if you were to go back in time, you know, and show people an iPhone, they would be like, what is this demon box, right? You know, and so I think it's fascinating to kind of explore just the extent of, you know, like I've seen things like, you know, on futuristic websites, or, you know, like technology trends, like, you know, like mind reading, like, you know, like to what extent they can, I know it sounds like crazy talk, but it is like legitimate discussions now about to what extent you can read people's minds, to what extent you can create longevity in people's lives, people living like hundreds of years, these kinds of things. I think these are actually things that actually overlap with theological concepts and like biblical things. So I think it'd be really interesting for Christians to explore that line sometimes between the technological and the scientific and what we call supernatural is actually kind of blurry. So I think that could be really interesting. Any closing thoughts?
No, just on that, I mean, I think if nothing else, like Christians just need to have an opinion. Like you've got, you know, I think Christians have got to be engaged in culture and not just be like, oh, that's bad because that's bad. Like that's not an answer anymore. Like we've got to move past.
And I say, don't let Christians tell you this isn't for us, don't go there. And don't let other people tell you this isn't for you, stay out.
Right.
So, sorry.
No, when you mentioned demon box, I feel like that's probably the same, you know, Greek Hebrew translation for sex robot. So.
Yeah, probably so.
I want you to find that and then let me know where that is.
All right, well, that's our show for today. We loved to hear some of the, you know, your comments and thoughts on some of the things we discussed, and let us know how you liked Guardians of the Galaxy 1 or 2. Until next time, see you later.
All you do is yell at each other. You're not friends.
No, we're family. Except maybe her.